All right. So like I said earlier, this afternoon, we're going to take a look at using some of the 3D embossing. And we're going to start with some of the basics. One of the things that most people are going to want to do, let's go ahead and close some of this stuff down. I don't need this DXF anymore. I don't even need the Batman logo, which we might go back to that later. I don't know. All right. So most people just want to take, say, an image and emboss it, making it a 3D relief. Now, that might be an image of somebody. It might be coastline. It might be just whatever. Really be anything. So I'm going to show you guys a couple of different examples of just images being embossed. Now, there is an Emboss Model section right here underneath the images. We want to right-click on that, and you're going to see a lot more content here. There's a lot more stuff to look at. And again, I definitely do recommend checking out those tutorials. We'll show you guys where to find those again here in a little bit. But first thing is we have our Emboss Model. So if I come in here, we have Emboss Regular, Emboss Sweep, two-rail sweep from image, surface to solid, so that's actually projecting an emboss to a solid. Emboss from a surface file, so you can save out an emboss feature and load that in another art project. Emboss from component, again, you can save a component and bring it into something else. Two separate, but very similar. Emboss texture, you can actually make a texture from an image as well. Mirror or invert, and then there's sculpting and smoothing, which we're not going to really use too much today. Then down at the bottom, you have the save whole emboss art as a surface file, or you can save it as a component file. So that's how you utilize both of these options here. But what we're going to start with is the most basic, the one that most people use, is the emboss from image. So let's go to our, let's just pick this Miami photo. So let's say I want an emboss of this photo of Miami. I'll go ahead and hit open. It's immediately going to give me the model size. So I can see it's about 14 by 20, 21. There's a resolution, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then you even have the origin. So again, just like the images, you can shift where that's sitting. But all embosses, just like images, default at XY00 in the bottom left corner. So in their upper, all of them are going to load into the upper right-hand quadrant. So just keep that in mind. If you need to move it to origin, you can. I usually try to work around this value, though. And we'll talk about the wrapped model probably before we end today. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now it's going to ask me the emboss from image now. So we've set up the stock, which was the last one. Now this is the emboss from image values that we can modify. So it's still giving us our X and Y size, but we also have a depth. So this is how high it's going to emboss. The origin, so we could still shift that separately than the rest of the embossed surface. And then we're telling it whether we want to add or subtract. Merge high and merge low get kind of complicated. We're really not going to touch on those today, but if you have overlapping geometry from one emboss to the other, merge high and merge low is what you typically use to kind of blend in between. There's some tutorials on those, but they get into some pretty specifics. I've honestly never had to use them for any embosses I've ever done. We're just going to leave it on add, and we're going to click OK. So it'll generate here, and if I zoom out, it's now given me a 3D relief of that picture of Miami. Now, some things are going to be really high. Like if I come in and zoom in to the buildings here, you'll notice that some of the buildings, the windows are protruding outward, and most of them are protruding inward. And all of that has to do with the contrast in the image. Just like with vectorization and the multicolor, the emboss is kind of looking and analyzing all the colors across the entire spectrum. So the whites are going to be more in the foreground. The blacks are going to be more in the background. So keep that in mind when you're looking at images. And that plays a big part in how to use some of these more complicated image types. So this probably wouldn't come out very well if I wanted to machine this. There's too many varying heights that it really would look like nonsense if I cut it. Now, some of the textures of the clouds, the water, all of that looks really good. But the buildings, from afar, they look fine. But in practice, they're probably not going to give you a good emboss. But you know what? Let's go ahead and throw a quick toolpath on it to kind of see what this looks like. And we'll kind of do this throughout each one of these. Now, we set up the job the same way. Your stock model is going to bind around your part. But keep in mind, it's only going to be the thickness of your stock emboss itself. So you're going to want to thicken your Z value there. And I'm actually going to make that 400 thou, and I'm going to add 100 thou to the top of Z. That way I have a little bit to take out. And then the origin, I'm just going to leave in the bottom corner. We're just going to pop that up 100 thousandths so it sits on the top of the block. You know what? It's not. Now it is. It's 198. Now for any embosses, it really goes for anything you do with the embossing. You're going to be using mill 3-axis. When you go into mill 3-axis, if any of you guys have never used the 3-axis, I definitely recommend checking out the 3-axis event that we have. You can either log into it the next time we have it, or you can watch one of the pre-recorded on the support site. But in here, you're just going to pick the geometry as the entire emboss surface. You can't pick portions. You pick the entire thing. And if you want to only cut certain parts, then you want to select boundaries to confine that. So top of feature is 0. Now the only toolpath that you ever really need with a BobART surface is a planer. So if any of you guys have just Mill Express, that is all you're going to have access to. If you have Mill Standard, Mill 3-axis Standard, you're going to have access to the Z-level rough, finish, planer, spiral, radial, and 3-axis plunge rough. Those are going to be the basic ones. So this would still apply to you guys. If any of you guys have 3-axis Pro, you do have more tooling options and more flexibility with some of those advanced toolpaths. Something we can always take a look at during one of the 3-axis events. We really don't focus too much on that here. So we're just using planer for today. Now I don't need anything on the posting page, so I'll hit next. Let's go ahead and say we're using a 3/8 ball. I find that's a pretty decent size when I'm not sure. This is a pretty large part, so. Now the size of the ball end mill is going to affect the amount of the detail. So if you have really tight details in a large ball, you're not going to see those details. You may have to change the size of your tool to get the details you're looking for. Planer is a step over calculation, so it uses a lace angle to determine which direction that step over is. 90 is going to go back and forth in the Y direction, where 0 degrees will go back and forth in the X direction. And you can also do variations of in between. You know, I could always go 45, which let's do 45. Why not? Then we have our step over. Let's just drop that down, maybe about 75 thou, see what it looks like. If you're taking off a lot of material, maybe this is a really thick emboss. This one's not that thick, so I'm not taking a whole lot off. You can turn on step downs and have this kind of rough it out before it finishes. So just keep that in mind. Planer does have that option. We're just going to keep it to part depth for today, just to simplify time-wise. Then I have my leads. I'm not too worried about all that. I'm not worried about my cutting extents. I'll just have it go to the edge of the part. And we'll just have it follow the profile. So I don't need the advanced feed rates. We'll go ahead and compute that. And we'll take a look at what the simulation looks like here in a second. All right, so I'm just going to let that speed through it. So you can see it's giving me pretty decent detail on a lot of this. You know, the water's starting to look pretty good, and it's running at a pretty low resolution while it actually runs the simulation. The clouds look pretty good, but the buildings look pretty terrible. Yeah, they don't look great, but everything else does. Now, there are tools out there to help with making these images a little bit better. Like I said, there's a Phototopia. There's a website that I use every now and then that can make specific types of images that are pretty good at this sort of thing. But again, that's not really something we're going to go through right now. If we have time, I'll kind of touch on that. Might even try to convert this image. So different images are going to give you different kinds of results based on that contrast that you're going to have. So let's open up a new file. We're going to go back to BobART, Emboss Model, Emboss from Image. And this time let's do, let's see here. That way I can see which ones they are. Okay, so I have a couple images that are a little bit more clear. I have some grayscale, some black and white images. Now you would think black and white would give you a really good contrast. But let's try, let's do this one. So this is just a plain black and white image. I found it on Google. I want to say it was a stock photo somewhere. And same deal. It's going to give you the model size for the emboss, the resolution, which will change how long it takes to calculate, so don't put that too high. And then it's going to give me the details for the image. Now I'm going to still leave it at 100 thousandths. Now this one took a lot less time to calculate because it's much smaller, but I'm getting some good detail on some things, but half of the face is sunk in. Half the eyes are popping out. It's because of that level of contrast. So if you're trying to get more realistic images, more realistic textures, more realistic faces, there's certain types of images to look for. Let's go ahead and close that out. I wanted to take a minute to talk to you guys about the different types of images that you can use to get different results. So the first one is called a normal map. Normal maps are generally made for textures. I use them all the time for doing signs, using like brick. Now that's a really low resolution, so I probably wouldn't use that one. But once you click on an image, you're going to see other textures very similar to it. They have seamless ones. That one's even lower resolution. Now this one's a much higher resolution, but it does have all the stock photo stuff on it. So I wouldn't be able to use that one. That would show up. So some of these images you might have to purchase to get the kind of effect you're going for. And you can tell there's a lot of different ones out there. Like, let's see what this one does. We're going to put this in our textures folder. I have a few of them already saved, as you can tell. We'll just minimize this. That was a JPEG. So if I emboss from image, go into my textures. Looks like that one's the one I just downloaded. Now this one is a tile, so I can see it's a perfect square. That means this one's made for a texture. I can use this to create a texture from it, have it small, and have it in the background of something. But I'm just going to emboss this image just to show you guys how it handles the contrast with this. You know what? Let's add a little depth, because that is not very deep. Now I've changed something on that. I've right-clicked on the emboss image and I went to edit and I changed it to 200 thousandths depth. In order to have that change take effect, you hit OK, right-click Emboss Model, and then hit Regenerate. So it's starting to give me a little more detail, but it's not great. It's not quite what I expected. But it's something you could always use as a texture. So normal maps really excel at textures. There's a lot of variants out there. You can get tons of different types. As you can see, there's all sorts of stuff. I think I have an aluminum, like aluminum foil kind of look. I've got cobblestones. I found a lot of different textures out there, and they usually come in really clean. Now the next image type is this ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is just a fancy term for saying a shadow map. This is essentially going to be giving you a map of shadows. Now what's special about this one is because if you remember me saying that it's looking at the contrast, the whites are going to be in the foreground, the black is going to be in the background. So if we look at an image like this fruit bowl here, which I actually have already downloaded, that's got some really good colorization. And that's going to give us a really good texture, all the way down to the texture on the orange. Let's go ahead and close that. Open a new file, Emboss Model, and Emboss from Image. Now I'm already in my textures. Let's go ahead and do medium icons so I can see them. There we go. There's the fruit bowl. I'll hit Open. I'm just going to hit OK, then hit OK again. Now this gives me a really good, clean vectorization, or emboss, sorry, where everything that is more white pops out more. If we mill this one, it's going to give us a much cleaner toolpath. It's going to look a lot better. I'm going to do the same thing, 400 thousandths on Z, add 100 thousandths to the face. Bring our origin to the top of the block, hit OK. And we're just going to go to mill 3-axis and add the same thing. I just need a planer. I'll even use the same 3/8 ball and mill. I'll even do the same lace angle, 45 degrees. And step over, I'll do the same thing, 75 thou. And we'll just compute it. That looks way too big of a step over. Let's go ahead and double check that. This is a much smaller part, so let's do 25 thou with a 1/8 inch ball. That looks about equivalent. Now to get this cleaner, I could have a tighter step over, smaller tool, but it's giving me a much more defined cut. Getting a much cleaner emboss from all this. So ambient occlusion, again, that's the absence of light. So it's a shadow map. That's going to give you a really crisp white to black ratio on getting a good 3D relief. Now the same thing can be done using a different type of image called a grayscale height map. Now it's not going to be the same as grayscale, and I have both kind of ready to look at. And I wanted to touch on all these different types of images real quick before we start getting into how to utilize some of this stuff, because knowing these things about these images will really help kind of making it all come together. Now a grayscale image, you might get a good vectorization of some of these. You know, like that might give you a decent something, but more than likely, it's not going to be what you're looking for. Grayscale is good. It's defined black and white. However, it doesn't give you height. The difference is you want to use a grayscale height map to generate actual height. So if we look at, let's see here, do we have a good one that I already don't have? That is teeny, but let's see what else we got in the same All of these are pretty small. They're probably all little purchasable ones. Yeah. That's a little better, but it's still not great. Let's see what else we got. Okay, this one's got a pretty decent resolution, and it's got a lot there. You know, there's a lot going on in this image. There's very, very white to all the way to very, very black. So let's go ahead and save this one. I'll even rename it so I know what it's called. So where ambient occlusions are the absence of light, Grayscale height maps uses the white to define where the foreground versus the background is. And it uses the different scales from white to black to get that. You're going to get really defined depth with this. So we're just going to hit OK twice. Now I might need to emboss this more. Sometimes with the grayscale, you actually have to add the height so that it comes out right. It's only doing 100 thousandths right now, so let's make that actually like, let's say 3/8. I'll go crazy with it. And again, I want to right-click the emboss model and go to regenerate. So it's now adding a little bit more depth. I could probably even go more. But I can already start to see that the parts on the inside are definitely in the background from the face of the skull. I wonder how high I can take this thing. Let's double it. Now it's starting to lose some of its shape. I think we're pretty much close to maxing that out. But you can definitely see where by adding more depth to it, it's popping out more and more and more. I could probably even go further. Say 1 inch. I don't know if that's going to add. Yep, that still added more to the nose. We could probably even go more. I find with the grayscale height maps, you really do need to kind of have the height in mind that you're getting. Because some of these will really come out much further. Now, I wouldn't probably mill this one just because it's kind of grainy. But since it's grainy, this is a good opportunity to show you another setting that helps with some of that graininess. And that is our smoothing. Now, you don't have to do anything. In this case, I want to do smooth whole model, so I'll hit OK. I'll just right-click Emboss Model and regenerate it. And it's actually smoothed out some of that based on the smoothing value. So if I right-click smoothing and hit edit, I can go up and down with this window size. So if I go, let's go up, let's say 100 thou. I don't use the smoothing as often, so this might be, okay, there we go. That's given us a lot more detail. That smoothed it out really well, and I have a pretty defined geometry. Now to do something like this, I would probably want to use 3-axis Pro. I'm probably not going to use planar and then cut this down. It probably wouldn't do very well. So if we leave the smoothing at 100 thou, I'm just kind of curious to see how far we can take this. Before it starts falling apart. Now it's still just now starting to define the nose. So this is already 2.5 inches tall. And still, even further still, it's still defining that a little bit. So you can kind of see where that distance is, but it is just a straight wall from here. So I could probably back it down a little bit and it would be good. But yeah, grayscale height maps are the way you want to go for creating that real good depth. Now, there's more to BobART, the embossing, then emboss from image. We're just going to close all these. I'm actually going to close my software here. Bear with me 1 second. It's always good to refresh the system every now and then by closing it down and reopening. It's just taking a second to reopen my BobCAD here. Now, there may be times where you're actually going to want to emboss individual things. So let's just go ahead and take, sorry, I got other windows I'm opening and closing here on my other screen. Moving some stuff around here, I apologize. You guys aren't quite seeing what I'm doing here. So I just drag and dropped the Batman logo back in here. I already had one saved. This one will be a good first emboss to kind of take a look at. So we'll go to BobART. So I already have the vectorization. Now I can emboss from that. So there's more to it than just bringing an image and getting 2D geometry or bringing an image and getting it to be a 3D image. You can come in here and do Emboss Regular. So Emboss Regular, and I want to say this is the full 13. Yeah, this one's huge. Let's cancel this real quick. So this is roughly 14 by, let's say, 8. So I'm going to make my stock first. It does encompass the whole thing. I'm happy with that. I might want to add a little bit more to the one side, so let's modify that. Let's maybe make it 8 1/4. That looks more or less even all the way around. It doesn't have to be. You can always trim off the non-embossed area, which we're going to take a look at that here a little bit. Now, it is hard to see my geometry, but just like with images, if you hit the E key, E for emboss, it'll hide that emboss stock. So that is just a single key shortcut. If you're having issues with that, you do have the hide and show emboss model on this quick access toolbar as well. So I'm actually going to hide it for right now. I'm going to right click Emboss Model and I'm going to go to Emboss Regular. So when you do an Emboss Regular, you're going to have your cross section. So this is the type of geometry it uses as the embossment. So you have a convex arc, you have line, concave arc, convex ellipse, concave ellipse, spline, which you can kind of customize here. And then you do have a custom one, which you do have to load in geometry to utilize. So we're going to stick to convex arc for a minute. Let's set our radius to 1/4 inch, 90 degrees for the end angle. So it's going to do just a perfect little radius there. And we're going to add. Now, I might want to emboss the entire thing up that much. So if I right-click Geometry, I'll go to Reselect. This works just like if you're selecting for a toolpath. I have my selected geometry window. I want to hold Shift and select what I want to emboss. Now I'll go ahead and regenerate that. And if I show my embossment, now I have this surface that it created. So it gave me a radius, the 1/4 inch radius on the outside, and then it kind of flattened out. So from there, I may want to subtract between these two. So let's go ahead and go to Emboss Model, Emboss Regular. This time, let's do Convex Arc. Actually, you know what? Let's do Convex Ellipse. We'll change it up a little bit. And we'll do a subtract. I'm going to leave the default values. Playing with these values is really key, and we'll try to toy around with them a little bit. And now I want to reselect. Anytime you see the X here, there's something not done. And if you notice, there's a little red plus sign next to geometry. That means there's no geometry currently selected for that function. So we'll right-click on it and go to Reselect. Pick our two shapes here, hit OK. Right-click Emboss Model and regenerate. So now that's given me a nice radius coming into kind of an ellipse right into the bat logo. But I can even take it further than that and add a texture to the logo. I can add a texture to the whole thing, but I just want to do it to the logo itself. So I'll right-click Emboss Model again. This time I'm going to do Emboss Texture from Image. Now I don't know my stamp size. I don't know any of that stuff yet. So I'm just going to hit OK. I have to do two things now. We'll hide that emboss. First thing is I need to pick my boundary geometry, which for this one, let's pick the bat logo itself. Then I need to go in and pick the image. So I want to reload image. And I'm on my textures. So let's just see what I got here. You know what, let's try the brick wall. We'll show the emboss first. Now we'll go ahead and regenerate. And it just added that brick wall texture to the bat logo. Now I can adjust that texture by editing the image, or editing the texture from image, and then changing the scaling. I can scale it to the stock size to really blow it up, which you have to load the image first to do this. Now that made the brick wall even bigger. So you may have to play around with the way that it applies the textures you're trying to use. And then this would be milled out no different than anything else. The nice thing about all this is that I can go to the first feature here, and I can tell it, I want to subtract that instead. Now, it might break some stuff down, so then I might want to reverse this subtract, maybe make it an add. So now I have a deeper groove around an ellipse with a texture in the middle of it. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of think about how to utilize these different components. And I did want to point out, I know I said I was going to, in our help system, we already kind of looked at where the example was for the multicolor strategy. There are emboss examples as well. Let's see, I want to say those are actually under the tutorial section. How to create emboss. Now this actually should go through this pig art. This is probably one of the most inclusive, has every aspect of embossing things besides textures. I want to say it has everything, all the way down to nice organic looking ears using 2-rail sweep. Let's see where that's at here. And it takes you through why you're doing it. So I definitely recommend, if you're going to get into doing some of these embossed kind of details, to check this one out. This one's going to show you how to create these nice kind of organic shapes on top of everything else. Very, very good tutorial here. They even go through modifying the resolution to increase it. Which, if I go up to my Emboss Model, go back to the Create Modify stock, I can increase my resolution. Let's maybe make it 150. I do need to regenerate. And it will take a little longer, but I'm going to get a crisper image. Yeah, it's giving me a little bit more detail. Even playing with this ellipse, I could say maybe I want to do, yeah, we'll keep it convex ellipse, but you know what, major axis, let's bring that to like 250. Might get rid of some of these little peaks that are kind of in between. Yeah, so that softened it up a little bit, where the 1/2 inch was just a little much. Now I kind of wanted to go through making something out of all this. So we're going to spend a little time creating something. Let me go ahead and open up my DXF clip art again. Close this guy. We might try to incorporate a few things all into this. So let's go ahead. I'm going to grab open DXFs. We're going to go to section 28, which is our border and frames. This is design number 11. And I'm going to load in number 19. So that just brings in that DXF. Now I might want to bring in a couple of things. I might want to vectorize something on top of that. You know, this is where layers start to become really important. You may, if we want to bring in an image of something, which I don't think I have, yeah, we'll find something. I'll call this border or frame. I'll go ahead and select mode. Window pick the entire thing. I want to right-click the workspace, and then modify attributes, layer, and then pick the frame layer. That way I can hide it and still have other stuff on the screen. That's going to be really important when you start vectorizing multiple colors, when you start vectorizing, when you have other stuff going on, because then you're going to need to scale and modify. So we'll do a quick Google search. Let's see if we can't find a good BobCAD logo. And that's what I was looking for, is just the head, but we're going to just grab one of these. And I know I have really high resolution versions of these, but we're going to actually just grab one off of the internet. So now I may want to bring that image in and vectorize just the cat head. So it doesn't look too bad. Let's go ahead and vectorize. It's a little fuzzy. Let's go ahead and clean that up a little bit. Now I don't know what size I need it yet. I don't know any of that. So now that looks pretty decent. I'm going to try to see if cleaning up the accuracy, maybe make it 1.2. That's kind of one of my go-to numbers. So that cleaned it up even more. I think I like that. Yeah, that's getting good detail everywhere. I'm happy with that. I may modify this just a hair, but other than that, I think it's good. So we'll just do a drag corner, maybe take this corner right there, bring it down. That way I have a little more defined little forehead there on the cat head. And then I don't need the rest. I'll just delete this stuff out. But now if I turn the frame on, they're pretty much right on top of each other. So I need to do a couple of things. I need to figure out what size the frame needs to be, and then I need to scale both of these so that they look right. So let's say we want the widest point of this sign to be, 12 inches wide. So I'm going to just move over to the frame layer. I've already got my emboss or my vectorized geometry I want. We'll go to evaluate, measure to, and I'll measure from one far point to the other. So I'll get right on the radius. So that is a little less than 5.5, or a little more than 5.5, sorry. So I want to scale that up to 12. So I'll go to Utilities, Translate. And the reason I use Translate instead of the actual scale function is scale is great if you want one way and not the other, non-uniform scaling. Translate does uniform scaling, but I can move it better. So I can move it and reposition it to where I want, rather than scale where I just have to live with where it's at and then move it later. I prefer translate if I'm not doing non-uniform. So again, I'm going to enter in my scale factor. First select our geometry. So the scale factor is going to be the size I want divided by the size that I have. So 12 divided by 5.5, 381. And now I'm able to kind of move that and reposition it without doing anything else. Hit OK, cancel, and now I'll remeasure that. And it should be 12 from end to end. 12 and 1/10 of a thou. So I'm pretty close. I'm pleased with that. Now having the multiple layers, now that cat head is kind of in the middle, but it's not really where I want. Now it's actually a pretty decent size, so I might get away with being able to utilize it just the way it is. Let's go ahead and close that so we get more room. We'll go to Utilities and Translate. Now luckily, the cat head is all one set of geometry, so I can hold Shift and pick it. Turn off my scale factor. Let's just move it into a position that we like. Maybe bring it down a little bit, because I'm going to add some font to it. So maybe I want the cat head there and maybe just say BobCAD above. All right, so I want to create some text, maybe have it say BobCAD right above that, maybe on an arc. So let's go ahead and go to Create 2D, Line. And one of the things that will help me here is if I turn my construction lines back on, down at the bottom, I can find kind of a point to start at. So maybe I want to start one here and go just straight across. Whatever distance, doesn't really make much difference to me. I just want to have that line there. Now that line is going to be the basis of where I place my text. I'm going to bend this just to kind of mix it up a little bit. So we'll go to Utilities, Deform. And I can grab and just kind of arc it up a little bit. So we'll go into Text, maybe use a Windows font. And I know I have our BobCAD font in here, and I just don't remember exactly which one it is. So we're going to use something else. Let's find out what it looks like first. Now 1.5 is a little big. One thing to keep in mind though is different fonts may come in different sizes. So just be aware that just because you've set a height doesn't mean it's going to be the same height for every font. Like I'm kind of partial to that one myself. And I think the, let's do CAM. Yeah, I think that might work. Let's make it maybe just a slightly smaller, maybe 900 thou. Now let's go a little less, 750. And I can even add extra spacing to this to spread them out, just a hair. So that should lay nicely across that arc. Oh, I hit cancel. Why did I do that? It's all right. I don't really need to change anything. It keeps all of my values. Now I'll hit cancel. So again, this is fit text to curve. So I go back to text, fit text to curve, pick my text entity, pick the end of the line or end of the first entity, depending on if you have multiple entities in the chain. Hold shift and pick it again. I'm going to set it right in the middle. And I think I got that actually pretty decent here. Let's do distance from path. I want to bring it down a little bit. So let's do negative 100 thou. Maybe move it over 100 thou too. So you can shift it here and there using these two values. You have a move text from start and a distance from path. Now I don't need that line in there anymore. I could actually go ahead and delete that out. So I've got something to kind of start with. So I'll go to my BobART. Now I need to figure out the size here. So I know it's 12 wide, but it needs to be a little bigger. So let's say 13 by 10. Okay, so I got a decent sized stock there, and we're going to trim everything off the outside. All right. Now, depending on which way I want to go with this, I may want to raise everything. So let's do an Emboss Regular, but maybe I want to do a line. So let's bring it up 1/4 inch, but the slope angle, let's make it a little steeper. Let's do 65. We'll reselect geometry, and I'm just going to pick the outside. So it kind of made that little badge shape. Brought that all up. I'm happy with that. Let's hide that emboss. Now I may want like a little round ridge in between. And I don't know the distance between these geometries, but if I do evaluate measure 2, let's just get a good generalized idea here. We could probably do an 1/8 inch radius, but I'm going to try doing a 100,000th radius between them and just see what it looks like. So BobART, Emboss Model, Emboss Regular again. Now, if I do a convex arc, if I want to make it like a little, almost like a drip pan kind of ridge, I want to do a subtract. If I do a convex arc, I want to make that to an add. I know it seems backwards, but that's how it kind of works on that. So pick my geometry. Pick those two there. Regenerate my model. So now I have a nice little ridge going all the way through. All right, it's not too bad. All right. Now I may want to add some textures to this. One of the things that I like to do is add texture. I think it just brings a lot of character to stuff. So we're just going to go ahead and emboss texture from image. We're just going to pick another image type. I'm going to give it this boundary as my boundary. So that texture is going to get applied to everything. And we're going to see a couple of things happen with this. So you kind of have to think ahead of time about how these embosses are going to apply down the line. Let's see, what texture do I want to use? I have some wood textures. I think I'm going to use this. I think this was the aluminum foil one. I don't remember what that exactly was. Let's see what it looks like. Oh, perfect. That's kind of the one I wanted. So I have this nice kind of gritty kind of texture going on in there now. And if I go into a front view, it did add. So you do want to be careful about how much it's adding to what you're doing. You may have to subtract out an area and then add the texture, and just depending on what you're trying to do. Let's go ahead and edit this. I want to do an add, but we probably want to shift it down. Let's see here. How do I want to bring that down? I don't want it to add to the whole thing. Now let's see what subtract looks like. I may have to do it as a merge high or merge low and see what that does, but now subtract kind of did more or less what I wanted. It brought it pretty much right to that surface. It's going down a little bit, but not much. You know, it's just inside of that surface. So I think I'm more happy with that than I was the addition. Now let's add an Emboss Regular for maybe the BobCAD head. I'll do an ellipse. And I'll leave the default values. We'll add it to what's on top. Reselect my geometry. And again, I hit the E key to hide the emboss. Hold Shift to pick my cat head. Right click and OK. And then we want to regenerate that. But it applies the texture to the cat head. So you do need to know kind of ahead of time how you're going to apply these things. To avoid that, you just want to add that cat head and the eye to the selection for the boundary for the texture. Now that's by itself just an additional emboss. I may need to tweak it a little bit. It looks a little sharp there. Let's go ahead and modify that, maybe 250 instead of a 1/2 inch for major. I usually like to get the emboss on there and then start playing with the numbers and kind of fine tune it in. That does a much better job of what I wanted to get. Now the rest of this, I may actually just want to do as a V-carve. I may not want to do anything else to the rest. We may want to make that just a V-carve kind of section. So let's go ahead and go to our CAM tree. This is kind of a way to bring it all together to do something. New job. Now it's already binding around my geometry, my 2D geometry. But if I turn my emboss on, it's not actually embossed bound around that. So let's hit calculate stock again. And it updates it. So it's 350 in height. Let's actually make that 1/2 inch. And I'm going to add, let's say, 50 thou to the face. Oh, actually, you know what? Cancel. The other thing I wanted to do, because we got all this area that I don't need to cut. When you're setting up your stock, there is a button, remove non-embossed area, this little check mark. Let's actually increase the resolution too. As long as I turn that check mark on and then re-vectorize it, or re-emboss, regenerate, my computer's starting to struggle. I'm kind of doing a lot to this thing. These GoToWebinars really take a lot out of our systems. There we go. So that gets rid of all of that extra stuff that I do not need. I don't want to mill any of that other stuff flat, so I'm going to get rid of it. But now this, I can go in and set up my job. So let's go Stock Wizard. I'll hit Calculate Stock again to... so even though I'm doing Calculate Stock again, I forget about this every time. It's still looking at the non-embossed area. It still sees all that, and that's fine. We're just going to leave it this way. We're going to add maybe 50 thousandths to the face, and we'll make the thickness 450, just so we have a full 1/2 inch thick piece. Origin, we'll just slap right on the top of the part. Now, I would still cut everything primarily the same way. You still do your mill 3-axis with the planer. We don't really need to set much here. We'll set it with maybe a 1/4 inch ball end mill. We're going to have a lot of toolpath here, but that's all right. Maybe go in with a 0-degree lace angle. We might even have to do 2 different degreed angles just to get the good results we want. Maybe go in with a 25 thou step over. I know that's going to be really tight. And we really don't need the rest here. Let's actually take it to part bottom. I want it to go all the way to the bottom of the edge of the part. And we'll have it follow surfaces. And I think once this calculates, I'm going to go ahead and save this one, just so I can make sure we don't lose anything up to this point. All right, so we got a lot of toolpaths here covering everything. But let's go ahead and add in some other stuff. So I also wanted to take and do some V-carve. Now the V-carve does get a little tricky here because now we're not dealing with the top of feature quite where it was. It's actually in a different location now. So we'll do mill V-carve. The geometry I'll pick is going to be the text and not the cat head. Let's do the text and all of these little leaf pieces. Now I don't know how these are going to come out. I've never actually used this particular frame. I like to mix it up every time just so you guys see just how much it is the same every time you're doing it. It's just a different shape, different geometry. You know, looking at the different shapes, you can find different things to kind of do with them. My top of feature is no longer 0 though. Because I've actually milled down a little bit. So I want to say it's going to probably drop down about -100 thou, maybe even less because of that texture. But we're going to start there and then kind of manage the rest of it. So we do V-carve finishing. I'll use the 1/2 inch 90 degree. I think that'll be big enough. I can even modify it and do a much larger diameter V tool so that it doesn't go as deep because I'm going to just tell it to just run, no pocketing. I want to see how that does. So let's hide this 3-axis feature. We're going to blank that out. That might be about right. We might have to adjust that planar height, the V-carve finishing, but that may give us a decent result here. Let's take a look. And I said I was going to save it, and I didn't. So let's hope it opens the simulation. All right, so before I go too far, I'm going to do a save as soon as it allows me to. Just call it sign. All right, now let's see what this looks like. Now, I really would step down with this planer. I wouldn't do this in one shot, especially with a 1/4 inch, but let's just see what it looks like, and then we'll kind of critique from there. I might also have to tell it to bottom a job to get it up off the floor a little bit. See if we can't speed that up a little bit. So we can see it's definitely cutting that all the way across. Let's just pause. We'll speed through the planar portion. Just drag that along. So that's looking pretty good already. I'm digging that. I think that looks nice. Let's go ahead and keep running it. I'm curious to see where that V-carve lines up though. So it didn't quite get deep enough on the V-carve. So we have to adjust that depth, that height, where it cuts from. Typically I start at the subtract amount that you give it, and then I modify from there. Let's go another 50 thousandths. Actually, let's say 175. I think it's going to be a little bit more than the 150. I'm going to save this again. That way, if it does crash, we still have it. Now we've already seen the planer. I'm going to skip that one. We're just going to click on V-carve finishing over in the move list. Now we'll see if this V-carve is actually going to engage throughout. Yeah, that looks much better. I could probably adjust it a little bit more to get more of the stem part of the leaf down at the bottom, but that actually gives me a more defined leaf shape than I would have with just doing a basic V-carve. Now the BobCAD portion can be a little deeper, so what I'll do is if you can go up to a larger diameter V-tool, it's not going to go as deep, and we could set a lower top of feature. So let's adjust this a little bit. So we'll say negative 200 thou, but on the V-tool itself, I'll say it's a 3/4 inch 90 degree. And we'll rerun that. And again, we'll skip that planer just to show the V-carve. So I may still get the result I'm looking for, but a little bit cleaner. Yeah, that looks a little better. So the size of your tool can really make a big difference when you're doing the V-carve in affecting the total depth that you're going to go. Yeah, I can go in with a larger V tool and it would do even less than that. And then lastly, I would just do a profile around the outside. Now I think that gives us time for maybe one more emboss that I think we can do. Yeah, that text looks pretty decent like that. I'm going to go ahead and save that just in case. I definitely made this too big for us to run in our little mini mill here, but maybe one day I'll find somewhere to mill it. So one of the last things that I want to talk about with the embossing, just go back to this BobCAD one, is using the wrap model option. So when you do the create modify stock, there's going to be a wrap geometry option. But first, I'm going to emboss from an image. Now the image that I'm going to emboss from is pretty big, so I'm going to have to do some tweaking. So I'm going to open this one. Now this is a grayscale height map, so we're going to have the real distinct height distances between background and foreground of this geometry. It's coming in as 426 by 639. This thing is massive. I'm just going to hit OK. And then we're going to change the aspect ratio. We're going to keep the aspect ratio, and we're going to scale this down. So I'm going to say this is going to be, I don't know, let's say 5 in X. So that makes it 7.5 in Y, 5 by 7.5. So I want to go to the create modify stock, change our values for the stock size, and we'll regenerate. So that gives me my emboss. Pretty decent. I mean, the tail's much further in the background than the face. You know, it's giving me a nice, clean, crisp embossment here. But under the create modify stock, there is a wrap model. So if I click full cylindrical wrap, I'll have it go around the Y-axis and hit OK. It takes that and just wraps it around. So now I could run this on a 4-axis machine. So let's go ahead and double check the size here. I'm going to just write that number down. And you know what? Let's say we want it to be a full cylinder, but let's make it 2-inch. So that just tightens it up just a little bit. That makes it a little easier for us here. Now to do this as a 4-axis job, and I know this is going a little beyond just BobART, but kind of all incorporates everything because you can still do this with your BobART. We want to go to Create 3D and make a cylinder. The cylinder is already the right size. I'm just going to get it to the right height. So it's going to be 7.5. And then we're going to rotate that down so it sits along that piece. Oops, wrong axis, X, and it's negative. So now I have that cylinder going right down the middle of this embossment. And there is a little area where it doesn't connect in the back end. And this is where things kind of get interesting. And it may not apply to anybody here, but it's something that I like to touch on because 4-axis can really benefit from some of this. Now, when I set my stock up, I'll do cylindrical stock this time, and I want to do bounding cylinder more than likely. But when I calculate that, let's make sure I'm going around the Y-axis. I have the right length. It's just a fuzz over the length I need. And the diameter looks good, but if I go into a front view, it's not centered. And I know it's hard to see that, but my z-axis is sitting at a positive 2 4/10. I'm going to set that to 0. I know that doesn't seem like it does much, but it actually does shift it just a hair. And we'll add a little bit to the diameter, so we have a little bit on the outside. Now, most of you, if you do have any 4-axis machines, you're probably going around the x-axis, not the y. So what I want to do is tell my x direction, it follows along any vector going along that axis. I can flip it, so if that's the face of the part, this is sitting more towards the chuck, the rotary. And then it's just a mill 4-axis rotary. I would probably do a full rough around the whole thing first. So let's say we do 2 rotaries. One is going to be a rough and one is going to be a finish. The rough, I might have a flat end mill, or a bull nose, maybe a 1/2-inch bowl or something. Now let's give it a 40th thou radius. I usually don't go too much bigger than that, maybe a 16th. We'll do a 16th. So I want to do zig. I want to go around the part. The rotary axis is the x-axis, and I'm cutting everything. Step over 100,000 should be fine for this. I'm not doing multiple passes or anything. I just want to cut all the way around. Now the next one is going to be a smaller tool because the detail that I want to get. So let's say this is going to be an 1/8-inch ball. I still want to go around. I still want to do zig. I'm still going around the x-axis, but this time I want to do a cut interval. I don't know what that interval is yet, though. So you may have to kind of think about this in a few different ways. Well, actually, there's only one way to think about this. Your x-axis, or your z positive is the 0-degree location. So whether you're going counterclockwise or clockwise from there is positive or negative. So what we need to figure out is kind of where we need to be positive from z0, z positive pointing up, to where negative or positive around that cylinder we want to be. So we're actually going to hit cut all and not really worry about that just yet. We're going to throw numbers at it and kind of dial it in. Step over, let's just do 25 thou. Now instead of hitting compute, I'm going to hit finish because I don't want to calculate everything. What I want to do is go into a front view, and I can see my 0-degree location here. So positive, that brings it to about 180 degrees. Negative brings it to about, let's say, I don't know, 110, 115. Negative. So we'll do cut interval. Start angle we'll say is negative 115. And the end angle is positive 180. Now we'll compute both. Because that 1/2-inch end mill is going to get the flat portion of that no problem. But we don't need it to waste time with the other end mill doing the rest. So let's blank the rough one. Okay, so I went the wrong way with those angles. So notice I went backwards. So let's go ahead and reverse those. Now I'm going to hit finish because I don't want to calculate both, and then compute. So that actually does almost exactly everything I want. Let's make it 120, just to get that tool past it a little bit. There we go. Now we're going to open up for Q&A here in a minute. Pretty much it made perfect timing. So if any of you guys have any questions, we will touch on any of those here. If not, thank you guys for coming today. Kind of covered everything I'd like to today. So if you guys don't have any questions, you're more than welcome to pop out. We do try to send a survey. So if any of you guys are leaving, should get a survey in your email. We like to hear back from you, see how things are going, see what you'd like to see in the future. We're always open to suggestions on these. And just let us know how you thought of it. And now that's going with that small end mill, which I probably even need to do a tighter step over, but that's all right. But it's only cutting the area I need. Nah, I think that's just fine. So you can use BobART in a lot of different ways. It's not just for signs, and I mean, you could bring all sorts of stuff in. We have guys that have done full like cylinder head with logos and stuff all over it, and really kind of cranked out some good stuff. But yeah, if any of you guys have any questions, just let me know. We'll be here for a little while longer today. And if there's no questions, we'll probably end in about 15, 20 minutes. If there are, we'll stay a little longer. And I will be right back, and then we'll field any questions you guys might have. All right, I am back. Oh, no problem, guys. Thank you guys for joining us. I see you guys, some of you guys have already popped out. If any of the rest of you guys have any questions, let me know. Like I said, we'll be here for another 30 minutes or so at most. And if anybody guys have any more questions, just let me know. We're going to probably close this down here another 5-10 minutes if we don't have any questions here soon. Again, thank you guys for coming out, joining us today. Keep a lookout for more events in the future if none of you guys have any questions. All right, so I think that does it for today. Thank you guys for joining us. Until next time.